A group of conservationists, woodlot owners, and scientists is calling on the Gallant government to rewrite the rules that protect Crown forests in New Brunswick. The current Crown Lands and Forests Act was written in 1982, 33 years ago, and they say it doesn't reflect modern realities. Attitudes towards forests or wood activities should be allowed in them. Lois Corbett is part of the group. She is the Executive Director of the Conservation Council of New Brunswick. Roberta Clowater is the Executive Director of CPAWS, the New Brunswick chapter of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, and they are both with me in the studio. Good morning to you both. Thank you for coming in.
Morning, Terry.
Why ask for this now?
Well, I think we could have asked for it earlier. We were trying to, I think, give the new government an opportunity to find its feet and to recognize, as do all of the groups that came together yesterday, that the act is old, times have changed, we've got to move on. And we know that they've been examining the strategy introduced by the previous government. But we've seen little evidence that they're prepared to move on with sort of today's forest management practices. Look, new legislation is not going to fix everything that's wrong in our woods. We know that. But New Brunswick is one of the last provinces to update its 80s legislation when it comes to managing Crown forests, and we think that this government needs to get on with that important job.
Okay, Roberta, what particular aspects of the Act would you like to see changed?
Well, we think that one of the first changes that needs to be made is to put a framework in place for public engagement, involving the public in setting the objectives and deciding how the public values will actually be protected on Crown land. There's been the policy development culture within government regarding Crown forest and Crown land management is there's a culture of working behind the scenes with mainly with industry to make decisions and set the direction, and we think that they need to move more towards a culture of engagement with the public and collaboration. And these kinds of tough problems really need us all to pull together, and we need to find solutions together. And this way that they've been doing Crown forest policy, where everything is internal and they don't appear to be actually listening to the people that are banging on the door from outside, it has to change. It's changing in other parts of Canada, and we really need to get with the program and create a new policy development culture that involves the public.
You were Executive Director of CPAWS when the Select Committee on Wood Supply did its work and conducted the most extensive consultation with New Brunswickers in the history of the province about forestry, and those findings were basically ignored. Why do you think the government approach would be any different this time?
Well, I'm hoping that a new government is going to take this opportunity to show some leadership and say, you know, that was the old way. It's not working for us. It's not working for us economically. Even the Auditor General in her report noted that we're not getting the economic returns, and there's no way of tracking whether or not any of the economic promises are actually being realized. So if it's not working for the economy, it's not working for all of these different aspects of society that are representing what the public's values are with respect to Crown forests and wildlife and water and fertile soil, and also helping to buffer us from climate changes, then it's not working. And doing more of the same is not going to work again. So we really need a new direction, and we're hoping that perhaps the Premier will take a page out of the new Prime Minister's book and try to revamp things and do things differently and go in a different direction and recognize that we're all in this together and we need to find solutions together, and this old school way of dealing with policy needs to change.
Lois, how do we know the Crown Lands and Forests Act as it exists now isn't working?
Well, I actually think that's a great question, because it's very hard to get information on from industry and from government. You would think once the government gives away public supply of wood that we would be able to track somehow the consequences of large-scale clear cuts, for example, but we can't. So I think this is one of the. You think about in 1982 when Time Magazine's Man of the Year was a computer. So nowadays we can track progress if progress is posted on the internet. We could have more engagement and interaction. But government doesn't do that because the legislation doesn't require them. That's why we need new legislation to open up the curtains around the Crown Forest and let us all see. Show me the evidence that the strategy is working. Show me the evidence that the strategy isn't working. And until we get the framework in place, the legislative framework in place that puts duty on government to report activities and duty on companies to report publicly their activities, we won't know. Until it's too late.
Give me your most pragmatic explanation of the obstacles that would face any serious change in the Crown Lands and Forests Act.
Corporate interests. It's behind closed curtains, closed doors. Business deals can be struck more quickly and without public scrutiny. Speedy decisions, often rashly taken, happen more quickly. So, I mean, there will be opposition to change in updating antiquated legislation. I know that. We're not naive here. But at the end of the day, going through a good policy conversation in public that will serve the interests of the people. Remember that the forests aren't the government's forests. The Crown forests aren't the Queen's forests. The forests are the people's forests, and the government holds them in a sacred trust and are supposed to manage them for us for today and for tomorrow and into the future. And so we need a new framework that sheds light, holds government and decision makers to account, and allow folks to have their say.
What would a cost-benefit analysis of the factors in favor or opposed to changing the Act show?
I think it would, excuse me, I think it would show that the public is getting increasingly dissatisfied with the way that the government is managing the forests on the public's behalf. They've stated time and again what their priorities are, and those priorities are never given primacy of place in any policy decision that comes out from government with respect to the forests. It's always said to be economic drivers. Well, we can't even believe that the economic drivers are working the way that they were supposed to. So, to me, there are very few downsides to trying something different, to modernizing, to getting into the 21st century with our forest management practices, instead of just staying with the same old school way of doing things. I can't believe that there aren't politicians with, the guts to basically say, we need to change this. This system is not working for anybody. Maybe it's working for a few, but it's not working for the most part for most of us. And it's also, it's not working to get us ready to be ready to respond to how the climate's going to change.
Let's use a concrete example in British Columbia, for example, after they modernized their Crown Forest Management Act. Community forest projects started popping up all over the place where communities would come together, form co-ops, cut wood sustainably, not using big, large-scale corporate industrial clear cuts. And communities started to thrive because in the new legislation there were provisions for community forest products and community forest projects, and that was innovation that came directly as a result of folks coming together to say, we want our hands in, we want our boots on that ground too. And communities have thrived as a result of that.
You two have been around in this province a long time. Have either of you ever heard a member of government, an MLA sitting on the government side, say, environment matters, the Crown Lands and Forest Act is not working? In all your time in this province, have you ever heard an MLA say that?
I suspect that the closest we might have gotten to that would have been during the select committee process when we actually had those public hearings, and there were members of government sitting on the select committee who heard what the public had to say and without, maybe they didn't exactly say that the Crown Lands and Forest Act wasn't working, but they certainly recommended some major overhauls to the way that things are done. Nobody has necessarily said it's the act that's the problem, but the act can definitely catalyze the solutions. And that's what needs to happen now, because we've been trying to pick around the edges of this for a long time and just do little bits, and oh well, they want a little bit of public access to this, and so just this nibbling around the edges is not working. It's not changing the culture of the way that we actually create policy with respect to the forests.
There are going to be some people who are listening to you who are going to agree with what you're saying and think you're on the right track, and there are other people, and you can read their comments on social media, who will identify the two of you as being part of a group of people who always say no, who are against any kind of economic development in the province. I mean, let's just deal with that head on, because you're going to hear that. It's already being said on social media now, and we don't know who's saying it because they're anonymous, but that opinion is out there. Okay, so let's deal with that head on. Lois, why don't you start?
People are entitled to their opinions, but I talk about solutions all the time. I talk about how to build up thriving rural communities that aren't so dependent on corporate industrial forest products. We have in our purses ideas and practical solutions that will employ people in this province. We have an economic challenge up against us. It didn't seem to me that when this current forest management strategy was introduced and then implied that economic nirvana arrived in New Brunswick. That way is not working. Look, the Auditor General told us this, that it's in fact costing taxpayers to support current forest management practices in the Crown Forest. When we get together and use innovation and the entrepreneurial spirits that New Brunswickers all display every day, I think we can come up with more jobs and better protection of the forest.
Are you anticipating that secret deal that was worked out between the all-word government and some of the forestry companies in the province would be adjusted in some way or repealed?
Well, I think that could be on the table if government decided to go with a new act. Back when the first Crown Lands and Forest Act was created in 1982, they stated right in the act that all the previous commitments and contracts that the government had signed with different mills, and they were changing the whole framework of the way the industry operated with respect to Crown forests. And so they did make changes in those things. That seems like there could be an opportunity there. And I think we have to get beyond being afraid of moving past the status quo. I think we need to, from an economic perspective, I mean, I'm a citizen of New Brunswick. I don't want the economy to fail. I want there to be an industry, or actually many, many industries, based upon our forests. I think that we're giving short shrift to those industries like ecotourism, like tourism in general, like hunting and fishing and guiding, and all of those parts of the economy that are almost like little ghost parts that nobody's really counting and nobody pays attention because they're small businesses and they're family operated companies, and we're not counting them. And so therefore, if they don't get counted, they're not being considered in the policy development process.
You know, the other sentiment that you see quite apparently on social media is, and in emails that we get here, is that there seems to be a resignation that no matter the validity of whatever argument is made by whatever critic, the actual decisions are going to be made in a closed group of people who have interests that need to be satisfied. I mean, people seem to be resigned to the fact that that's just the way business is done in New Brunswick.
I don't think we should ever give up hope that change can happen, that decision-making can become more transparent. I think that even old cars need new tires once in a while. So things can change. We have embraced the wireless world in the province. We can embrace a new way of thinking about how to manage our forests, especially when we open up those curtains and have a conversation to show that new ways will mean new economies and mean better production in our forests. And that's, I think, the magic ingredient, or the missing ingredient at least now, that when it's done by the old guys, behind closed doors, it's only their interests that are being served and not the rest of us. What if it could be much better? Let's not miss an opportunity to bring down some barriers and create more economic activity around our great Crown Forest.
Roberta, I have about 30 seconds left. What reaction are you expecting from the Minister of Natural Resources and or the Premier?
I'm hoping that the Premier and the Minister will be interested in meeting with us and talking to us about our ideas and take advantage of the fact that we are all saying, all those groups, the wildlife groups, the woodlot groups, the conservation groups, we're here to help. We want to help you do this. We want to engage all of our supporters and our members in this process, and don't feel like you're just in this by yourself. The Premier is a young, engaging, open-minded person, and I hope that he wants to take the leadership, but we're there to support him and to lift him up.
Thank you both for your time. Appreciate you coming in.
Thanks.
Lois Corbett is Executive Director of the Conservation Council of New Brunswick. Roberta Clowater is head of the province's Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society chapter. Any thoughts on what you heard? Any thoughts on the Crown Lands and Forests Act? Get in touch with me on Twitter at SEGUINCBC, or you can send email to info.amfrederickton@cbc.ca. And just a note, we have put in a request for the Minister of Natural Resources to talk about this issue on Monday. We hope to speak to Denis Landry on Monday morning's show. It's 7:30. It's time for your news. Here's Jennifer Sweet.